What is up, guys? You got NotTheWorst here, bringing another Black Desert online video, and today we are taking a look at an endgame PvE guide for Succession Woosa. We do have the Awakening coming out in less than a week, so I wanted to go ahead and get this out there to kind of finish off the Succession line before we start moving into new things. The class itself, if you're wondering, is it any good in PvE? It's one of the absolute best in the game for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's incredibly simple to play, arguably the simplest PvE class there is. I know a lot of people felt that way about Megu. They perform pretty similarly, except Woosa is even more protected, or rather her skills that are insanely quick compared to Megu in that regard. And as far as actual output for like trash loot at high-end endgame grind zones, they are roughly the same in that scenario. So very easy to play class. The other thing is all classes don't have this benefit, and some struggle more than others, but skills that you use that give you buffs, like you're an AP buff, DPD buff, evasion, shred, things like that. Those skills are actually really strong on Woosa as far as the damage too. So you don't have something like the worst case scenario for that's kind of like Succession Draconia. You have these pre-buff skills that you're kind of required to use, and they're terrible and slow and low damaging. You don't see that on Woosa, so it moves together very, very nicely as far as her skill rotation with really high damage output all the way throughout the rotation. So it's really, really nice kit, and you're able to do some pretty cool options with skill add-ons, which we'll see later on. So with that covered, let's go ahead, and first we are going to talk about our Lightstone sets. All right, so talking about her Lightstone setup, this is a class that is definitely best in slot with Death Blow. This is going to increase our critical hit chance by 14%, which does a couple of things for us. Now, a common mistake I see with all classes, this isn't just Woosa, her baseline critical hit rate out of the PvE rotation we're going to use is 50%. So all of the skills have a minimum of 50% on them. A very common mistake I see made by a lot of players is you'll have a 50% on that, which means with your buffs added on there, and if your class has a tier 3 add-on available to it, you pop a 30% critical hit rate, and you have 98% critical hit rate on all of those 50% skills, and you think that's good enough. It's not, and you're wrong. So let's get that out of the way. I see this come up all the time. It's often talked about between stream and Reddit posts and whatnot, and we think 98% critical hit rate is good, and you can run something else with more damage. That is incorrect. You need to remember that that critical hit rate procs for every individual hit. If you have a skill that's attacking 10 times, it's not a 98% roll if all hits are doing that. Every single one has its own critical hit rate roll on it, and those 2% of times that you're not critting on every single one of your skills that are at 50% base, which for Woosa is almost all of them, I think, except for 2 or 3. Pretty sure 3 of them are 100% and the rest are all 50. You're missing out on damage big time. It's easily monitored that way. Now, is it a massive amount if you don't have Death Blow currently? Do you have other options to run? Maybe she's the only class where that you're using and your tag doesn't use Death Blow as best in slot for it. So do you need to invest if you're on NA server, 10 billion silver and a prayer that you get 2 blade stones? No, you don't have to. Of course, we've got alternatives for it, but if we're talking min-maxing and the absolute best in slot for her, it is Death Blow. No substitute for that. You can't increase the critical hit rate. The other thing increasing that critical hit rate, though, is going to do, since we're using Death Blow for this, we don't have to devote a tier 3 add-on slot to a 30% critical hit rate. We can now run a 20% critical hit rate, and since she has 2 really good tier 3 add-on skills that we're going to be using, we can dedicate those to actually output more damage, which you'll see when we get into the skill add-on section and start talking about that, because Death Blow allows us to free up that slot. If you don't have that, or maybe you're just now trying out the class for the first time, and you haven't really gotten used to it, or whatever, or you're not sure, you just want to try it, and maybe you already have a main that's high end, and you're probably running something like Vicious Shadows. This is a great alternative for it. The damage output on this is very high. We get the extra back attack damage and critical hit damage, a little bit of monster AP, which may or may not be influential for you, depending on where you're grinding and what the AP cap is at that zone. But this is always a really, really solid choice for virtually any class. It's pretty versatile in that regard. The damage output will be slightly lower than Death Blow. You can make up some of that by changing out one of your add-ons to have that critical hit rate 30%. In fact, it's probably necessary to do so if you're running Vicious Shadows on this class, that you'll need to swap out for a 30% critical hit rate to at least get that 98, because 88% just ain't gonna cut it, buddy. Yeah, Vicious Shadows is a really great skill, or a really great Lightstone set, rather, to run in general for any class. This also really performs even better at spots like Gyfin, where you're virtually 100% back attacking every single one. Somewhat similar to Trolls, you'll have more back attacks available at Trolls. Hex, not as much, because you have a large group of mobs that are running around that you're grouping up, so your back attacks aren't going to be there. And when you're using some of her bigger skills, Stormfall and Cloud Rise, those are positioning and getting each hit to be a back attack is somewhat cumbersome, so it's not as important at a grind zone like that. So if you already have this one, it's a great alternative, very close in damage to Deathblow, and possibly outperforms it at Gyfin since you have 100% back attack. At a minimum, it probably matches it fairly well. Some other options, if you want to go with a few budget options, since we're talking endgame PvE here, we are looking at things like Trolls, Hex, and Gyfin. That means you do have some options with the Wild. So this Lightstone set will give you extra subspecies damage. So if you are at Trolls, you can run Demi-Human, and that applies to them. If you're at Gyfin, you can run Kama Sylvia damage, and that applies to them. And keep in mind, this damage is unaffected by AP caps. So if you're at Gyfin, for instance, and you're at AP cap, that's a 70% restrictive zone once you hit the cap. So every additional AP is worth 70% of what it normally is. So 10 more AP over the cap is only worth 7 AP. The Wilds is not affected by that for subspecies damage, so it's always worth 85% of the face value AP. So if you have 10 more AP, it's actually worth 8.5, which supersedes that Gyfin cap. And then this is a bigger impact at Trolls, since you have a 5% restrictive AP cap. Every 10 AP is worth 0.5 AP, whereas every point of subspecies damage when you're over cap, unaffected by cap on the subspecies, therefore 85%. So 10 subspecies damage is worth 8.5, drastically higher than stacking more AP. At Hex, you unfortunately don't have that option. Their subspecies is animal or beast type, which there isn't a stone set for that. There is an option for the Wilds where it's just raw AP, but again, because of these 5% AP restrictions in Elvia, I really don't recommend running that set. It's not very good, and the AP overall is not that great for other options. Some other budget options that are really strong are things like Trained Fists, and specifically, which is usually what I would say to go with if you're not running any of these other sets, but in Woosa's case, I'd really push you towards Enhanced Focus, especially at like Hex or Trolls, because the accuracy requirements are pretty high up there. We don't want to get any misses when we can avoid it. She does have a nice skill with good range as far as AoE range that has an evasion shred, but she doesn't have an accuracy buff skill that we use in this rotation. So you may want to make sure that you're calculating out your accuracy. Make sure you hit 100% hit rate with your setup. And if you're using a budget set and you don't have, Deathblow, Vicious Shadows, something like that, Enhanced Focus is a really solid choice to go with that. You can run Trained Fists if you don't need the extra 12 accuracy, but in most cases you're going to need that accuracy over that 7 AP difference between the Trained Fists and Enhanced Focus. So both great options to use as just kind of budget builds. Do whichever one you want, whichever one you got. Obviously, don't invest 10 billion silver into Deathblow when you're just trying the class out. See how you like it, and maybe your class tag already uses Deathblow, because there are several classes there it's best in slot, so maybe you'll just already have it, and that will work out. So now that we've covered that, let's go ahead and start talking about what crystal sets we can use. All right, so for crystals, we've got two different sets that we're going to look at. Some options, and of course you can mix and match this with what suits you or what your AP is, matching AP caps and making sure you're not exceeding them, especially at Elvia. First one we're going to talk about, we'll call our general PvE set. So this is pretty straightforward, nothing like really out of the ordinary. This is a find all-around set if you're not really caring about what your AP cap is for like an Elvia zone, or you're grinding Gyfin, so that the AP cap's not really that restrictive. This just kind of works virtually anywhere. Of course, Elcars and Vipers are going to get us the accuracy we need, which is really important, again, on this class, not having an accuracy buff in her skill rotation for it. The only thing that may be kind of a jump out at you is those Olycus crystals that we're using here. The idea is just to give us that extra attack speed, which is indeed very beneficial overall. Yes, it's human damage on it, which obviously doesn't apply in most PvE setups, and especially the 3 grind zones we're mainly talking about here. But if you happen to be at a human damage spot, Abandoned Monastery, Bloody Monastery, something like that, it will help out a little bit of extra human damage, but we actually just want those for the attack speed. If you don't have them with the extra attack speed, you can fill in the blank with some extra power crystals if you need the AP, or whatever. If you could even throw in 2 Hooms or something, or 2 Maclods, get a little extra P out of that with a little accuracy. Kind of your call. You can mix and match that. It's not really like required, but as far as raw damage output as just an all-around or general PvE, like we're calling it, the Olycus fits pretty nicely there. Obviously, Okrad's Corrupted, Rebellious are definitively just best in slot for PvE usage across the board. So then if we take a look at the next set, we're going to call this an AP cap set. So the idea here is with the gear that I'm using and the skill add-ons and setup buffs that we're running, we're going to hit our AP cap, and we don't need additional accuracy, like hit rate, or we don't need additional AP stacked up on this, so we reduce the crystals that increase those things, and we're going to choose some more defensive options. This can be especially good at like Hex, where you're kind of taking a beating from a lot of mobs from time to time, or when you're, you know, going try hard mode and you've got a whole bunch of spawns in with elites on top of each other's, and a Hex Marie pops up on you while your boss spawns there, and all this kind of stuff going on. Hooms can definitely be a little bit helpful there to help reduce some damage, give you some extra HP. Does have a little bit of extra accuracy on it, but enough so that we don't have to run Crystal of Elcars and we can pick up those extra 2 slots. We drop the Olicus in favor of the 2 Hooms to get the 4-piece set. And then the others are pretty static for just straight damage output from there, giving us all around enough to hit an AP cap. We still hit it. Trolls is 920, Hex 898, Gyphon's 800 something, much lower, but Gyphon we're not as worried about AP cap since it's not as restrictive as the Elvia zones. So obviously this isn't a you have to run this. You want to kind of build it around your gear specifically. You may not be able to run the Hooms and still hit AP caps, or maybe you're having to sacrifice damage, or you have to run back to town every hour for a house buff to still hit AP cap because you're trying to do that. But if you do have the gear to run it and still do that, then I'd recommend swapping out for some defensive options just to kind of help you out. You could, of course, run like Macalods in those slots if you wanted to. Extra stamina, extra accuracy, a little extra AP on it. If you need the AP, you could bust out a bunch of power crystals if you're really trying to push AP and just put those in 5 every slot on there if you need it and trying to make up some extra space. Mix and match, see what's going to work for you, and then just go from there. So with crystals covered, let's go ahead and start talking about add-ons and how they're going to tie in to our skill rotation. Okay, for add-ons, as always with these guides, the first thing I want to point out is that your add-ons should tie into your skill rotation so that you're avoiding overlap of specific add-ons and you're making sure you can maximize your damage between getting typically your big 3 for PvE. You're getting your monster damage in there, your attack speed, and your critical hit rate are good across the board throughout all of your rotations. So if you want to take this as an outline and then kind of make it your own over time, make sure that you do modify the skill rotation to match that as well. You don't want to like necessarily just copy the straight skill add-ons, but have a slightly different rotation, and then the way those add-ons overlap, maybe you've got gaps in it where you actually don't have monster damage up or critical hit damage or what have you that you actually need. The second thing I want to point out before we kind of dissect each one is when we talk about the extra AP against monster damage. I know we keep mentioning AP caps in this video, but because we're talking about endgame grind zones and that includes Elvia spots like Hex and Trolls, it's really important that you calc out your monster AP. So you'll notice that although we have 2 tier 3 add-ons in this setup, Cloudrise and Stormfall, note that I don't have the extra AP plus 30 to all monsters, and I also do not have critical hit rate 30%. This is because, as mentioned in the Lightstone set, when we're running Deathblow, we don't need a 30%. We can run a 20%. We're going to have max 100% crit rate on all of our PvE skills throughout the entire rotation, so we don't need to use it there. I don't use 30 monster damage because it's pretty unlikely when you have the gear for Hex or Trolls that you actually need the 30 monster damage in order to hit the AP cap. Again, 898 at Hex, 920 at Trolls to do that. So a 20 will probably suit you, and I will be honest with you, in the setup that I'm running right now, we actually already exceed that with buffs and everything up in this setup. I'm something like 932, which is way too high for Hex. So I have that set up just for ease of swapping to Gyphon and whatnot, but it's very likely because she has a AP buff skill as well. If you're very high geared, you honestly probably don't even need this extra monster AP plus 20, or you can run that and then change out, more crystals or what buffs you're running, or maybe you don't want to have to get church buff every hour, or every 5 hours at this point, something like that. So kind of make sure you're paying attention to that, calc that out, and make sure that it makes sense for you. So we have, as I mentioned, on our 2 tier 3s, these actually go at the tail end of the skill rotation, as you see, and we alternate between the two. So they're never up at the same time in order to keep our 100% uptime on our skill rotation. So those two get alternated, and therefore we have the same skill add-ons on each of them. Minus 20 DP and an extra critical hit damage plus 5%. As mentioned before, again, if you're not running Deathblow, you don't have Deathblow, you do want to put a critical hit rate plus 30% on both of those to make sure that you're maintaining your critical hit rate. It's going to be important without the Deathblow set to cover that gap for you. And then you can also choose to drop the DP for the 30 monster damage if you are a little lower in AP and need a little extra help hitting that cap. If you do have those, you get the benefit of getting an extra 5 DP shred that you wouldn't have otherwise if you were running, the minus 15 on a tier 2. And critical hit damage is just nicer. Those two skills specifically are very wide, and and they're your only two true long skills that take some time here. So obviously mobs are going to be moving. So running back attack here isn't like super amazing. Most of the hits that are applying to all of the mobs are not going to be back attacks, and even if they are, they won't be by the time the skills end. Cloud Rise is a little bit shorter in animation, so not quite the same, but same idea in general. So the critical hit damage just makes more sense to kind of eke out a little bit extra damage where we can get it. Other than that, we've got attack speed and accuracy where it makes sense. A little bit of monster damage on there. Critical hit rate to make sure that we maintain it. Our max crit throughout the rotation. The good news is the rotation is very quick. So all of these are going to be able to stay up fairly well until you finish off with your Stormfall Cloud Rise and just boost those up in damage. Something I do want to point out, because I commonly see this, we have the Evasion Shred on our Chrysanth skill, the -4% evasion, and this class actually has a really nice evasion shred skill as well, which is Bamboo. Note that we are not putting we're not putting the Bamboo skill or the evasion shred on the skill that has the evasion shred for the add-on. So what I mean, the thing about evasion shreds and why it's like technically subpar to an accuracy buff, you have to hit each mob with that skill, right? So the skill Bamboo has an evasion shred of 9%, and if we put on Chrysanth an evasion shred of 4%. This will apply to any class that you play, not just Woosa. If you put your evasion shred skill add-on on the skill that has the evasion shred, you are requiring that all of the mobs are hit by that skill in order to lower their evasion. So if you're calculating your hit rate to where you're within a few percent so that evasion shred actually kind of matters, and at Hex, at least for me, it doesn't, except for the boss, the Rift bosses that spawn from time to time, because they actually have even higher evasion than the regular mobs that are here. If you're calculating that out, you need to make sure that you want to have those on alternating skills so that you're not required to hit them. If I hit any mob with an accuracy rate, so I hit them with Bamboo and I get my accuracy rate plus 4%, no matter what, any mob that gets hit, that'll get applied. The evasion rate has to hit the mobs to be applied to that mobs, right? To those mobs. I can't debuff a mob that I didn't hit. So we alternate the skill add-on shred versus the skill shred so that we have one or the other hitting mobs in our rotation at all times so that we have that lowered evasion rate. And in most cases, they're going to get hit by both. If we put it on just one skill and maybe another group of Hex mobs spawns out of the little pink orb from the Soul Harvester while you're fighting them and they come in mid-rotation, guess what? They don't have the evasion shred, and depending on how you're calced out for hit rate, you might not actually have 100% on them, and you might see a little white mist pop up from time to time. So pay attention to that. It's not, again, this is kind of a min-max thing. It's not like end of the world one way or the other, but just something I wanted to point out. Last thing, we have back attack and critical hit damage on Wing Beat. Number one, this skill hits very hard. It's also your Black Spirit Rage skill that goes in, and it just so happens in the skill rotation, at least for Hex, this is typically when I reposition back behind the mobs. So putting in the back attack damage here just makes sense. It also is the lead into our heavier hitting skills like Stormfall that go further in. So we have that extra back attack for the first couple ticks that might get us there, and then the critical hit damage 5% will overtake that 3% afterwards. So again, just kind of an outline, something you can look at and kind of make your own as you get used to it. But these are going to tie into the skill rotation that we're going to take a look at next. So everything will kind of make sense and come together there. All right, so let's get into the skill rotation, and just to start off, I'm going to go ahead and pull everything up on screen for you. We do have the skill names with the icons on the left. If you want to pick it up that way, especially helpful more for the console bros. And if you're on PC and can't be bothered to learn skill names or what the icons look like, I got you covered. We've got skill inputs with the icons on the right, so you can kind of get used to the names, or at least what they look like, and figure out what's what, so you know where it is. Okay, so as we're going through, we can see we've got this set into 3 sections. So buffs, kind of our pre-buff damage, or pre-buff skills rather, that apply a couple different things. Our damage skills, which are very heavy hitters on this class. And then we're going to alternate, as I mentioned before, Stormfall and Cloud Rise. Those aren't going to be up every skill rotation, thanks to Stormfall's very long cooldown, and Cloud Rise, same thing. And also because of how quick we get through her rotation, her other skills are very short cooldown, so we can actually spin through this and put out a lot of damage very quickly. So we'll go through each one. Now, the first one, I'm going to tell you straight up optional. It's fan down. You don't need it if you don't want to put it in there. More so at Gyfin, you'd probably cut this. if you were just going to stand around instead. The point was that the timing for the wake up animations on them finishes when we get through the pre-buff, which is why I kind of threw it in there. The reason I'm mentioning we don't need it is it is pretty much just a DP debuff, and 2 skills later, that Cloud Carve is a very heavy hitting DP debuff. So we end up overlapping that skill with another DP debuff, and they don't both apply. So we don't necessarily need it, but it does help with the wake up animations. And then when I'm at Hex, traveling from pack to pack real quick while they're getting just grouped, I can just throw one in there really fast before we move forward with the rest of our skills. So you don't have to have it. You can cut it if you want to and just start right away with Fan Kick, but just wanted to point that out. It's more of a timing thing between your cooldowns and then like Gyfin wake up animation. So there's that. Anyways, Fan Down optional at that point. Fan Kick is our AP buff, and it's unprotected, so shouldn't really matter, but it just gives us that AP buff right out of the gate. We get an extra 20 AP that's going to be up throughout the rest of our rotation, which, again, makes sure we hit AP cap wherever we're grinding without having to invest through other means to get there. Now, Cloud Carve is next, and if you're on PC, I'm just going to point this out. The input for Cloud Carve is SF. However, if you hold F after your Fan Kick and then go into Cloud Carve, it'll automatically go into Cloud Carve for you. So you can just literally press F for the Fan Kick, and then hold F and it does the Cloud Carve, so you'll see 2 attacks with forward guard on them. Really useful and flows extremely well that way. Something I want to point out when you're doing that, though, is you want to be locking the chain to that Fan Kick. You can see here we have that locked because it's unprotected. The damage is, honestly, it's not bad, but like we don't want to be facing a bunch of Hex mobs we just walked into, have that skill unlocked, and then we're going to sit here kicking unprotected in their face for a couple seconds before we frontal guard Cloud Carve them. It's just not ideal. So I highly recommend locking that chain kick so that you're not actually running into it and you just go straight from Fan Kick into the Cloud Carve. If you want to keep it because reasons, I don't know, you like getting punched in the face, go for it. You can absolutely do that. That is completely an option, up to you. So next up, our last skill here, it's going to be our evasion debuff, essentially for our buffs. So we're going to press that one, and it flows into the next skill as well. Again, with this class, between Cloud Carve and Bamboo, these skills actually hit really hard, honestly. For pre-buff skills, just getting DP debuff and then evasion shred on them, the amount of damage they output is really nutty, especially compared to other classes that have to use pre-buff skills that are really unappealing. So it's one of the reasons she's really strong in PvE. After that, we're going to go straight into our damage, and coming off the input, again, if you're on PC, the input from Bamboo, we're going to use Bamboozled and Orchid. Bamboozled is sort of a flow to our Bamboo skill, so you can actually just press WE and then you're going to hold E afterwards for the PC guys. Sorry, console, I'm not 100% sure what your interaction is. I imagine it's hold whatever the same button is, and it just does the same damage that you did with Bamboo, but times 6 on it, right? So you just you're going to do the WE and then hold E, and then you're going to hold E again to get us into our next skill, which is Orchid. Again, sorry, console guys, I assume you just, if it's X button, you just hold X the whole time, but whatever. So you're going to do WE, and then we're just holding E. So you see, I went a little too long there, but you can see we do each one of those. We go Bamboo, Bamboozled, Orchid, all just by pressing WE, E, E. And you'll see that forward guard animation is how we know we got the last one. From here, personally, I like to reposition because the mobs have probably turned around by now if they weren't from the get-go. So from here, I'll just step behind them and then go ahead and use my spacebar skill. And when it's not BSR, that's the BSR version, that's Wing Beat. So it's got 2 forward guard hits when it's not a BSR setup. It hits really, really hard. This is the one we put back attack and critical hit damage on to maximize that damage. So we just get behind him and then hit him with that spacebar. It hits very, very hard. The other thing that repositioning at that point is nice for is because it's a spacebar skill, will jump if you're not using it directly after. If you don't need to reposition, it does have the same interaction right after Orchid as well, so you can go straight into it after Orchid. But just keep in mind, if you're doing something else and then you try to do it like slow, you're going to jump. So keep that in mind. That's another reason just repositioning is really nice. It's a fast interaction right into that Wing Beat. Hit them really hard. Right after Wing Beat, we're going to use Chrysanth, which is a very heavy hitting skill as well. And by using it directly after Wing Beat or after a skidding step if you need to reposition at that point, by using it then, it actually has much lessened startup time. So if we do Wing Beat directly into Chrysanth, it hits right away. And then if we use Chrysanth, it's got kind of a longer cooldown. If we use Chrysanth without doing it after a skidding step or a Wing Beat or some other skill that chains into it, you can see there's kind of a startup animation to it. You see what I mean? It's a longer forward guard that way, but we're not dealing any damage while that startup's going. So yeah, we want to use that right after Wing Beat so that so that we get that in there. The next two skills, Plum and Swirl, happen pretty quickly with it. Again, really nice damage skills that just flow really great right after Chrysanth. So if we Wing Beat, get our Chrysanth, and then we're going to Plum and then Swirl. And the Swirl looks really cool too. She throws her fan out in front. All protected, all high damage skills. Not much explanation needed. Why not use high damage skills while you can? Then we're going to go into our big boys with our tier 3 add-ons where we really start to dump some damage in. Stormfall and then Cloud Rise, and you can see we're saying we're alternating these because we're not going to use both every rotation. We're going to do a rotation with Stormfall, and then when we do the rotation again, because she's so quick through this rotation, we're going to use Cloud Rise since Stormfall will be on cooldown, and then rotate. Something I want to point out when we were talking about Lightstone sets and different options, if you're not running Deathblow, it is probably in your best interest to start from the bottom of this skill rotation rather than the top, because you really want that critical hit 30% rate on there. If you have Deathblow, you're not running the 30% critical hit rate because you don't need it. So you want to keep it this way and just have a wild DP shred and critical hit damage on those skills at the end. So keep that in mind. You want to start with those if needed. They are longer animations, but yeah, not running Deathblow, I would probably just start out with a Cloud Rise. So you'll alternate between those two at the end. They are long. So that you switch from one to the other. So that's it. I'm going to go ahead and do the rotation a couple times with each of the skills on the end of it, so you can just see what it looks like. I do use fan down, so you'll see me do that each time, but it's up to you. So. Okay, and that's how we end with Stormfall, and then we'll do it again with Cloud Rise. And there you go. That's with Cloud Rise. So very easy, very protected combo. You have minimal, very minimal inputs that are not protected with her. Something to keep in mind is since you do have Flitting Step and Chain Flitting Step as well, which are really great repositioning skills, keep those up and make sure you're maintaining your back attacks as often as possible because high damage output from back attacks. So yeah, obviously you want to use those as much as possible. You can see me using the skill on actual mobs, grinding at Hex in the demo piece that we'll end off this video with, so you can take a look at that actually being used rather than just sitting practicing it in town or whatever you're doing, to kind of get some ideas of when you want to reposition and that sort of thing. If you're grinding like Gyphon or Trolls, the AoEs are more direct that are happening, so repositioning is pretty obvious at that point. You don't have as many like mobs like coming at you as you do at Hex, so obviously don't stand in red circles so you don't get hit for a bunch of damage. So there's that. So that's going to be it for this video. If you did enjoy it, be sure to like it. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you get notifications when new videos do go out. And if you'd like to see me playing live, there's a link to my Twitch page in the description down below. Jump on over there, drop a follow so you get notifications for that as well. With that said, that's going to be it for this one. Thank everybody for watching, and I will see you next time.